I'm just gonna record, and I'll see where I'll start clipping.
Okay, this is perhaps Job and Luke discuss theology.
Could
Number
be, yes.
1 of 200.
Oh yes, a beautiful series full of potential.
Yeah.
Yeah. Job accidentally mentions 5 different heresies. Yeah.
Oh man, those are the
So
best.
I'm working with my pastor, and I've suggested we try an out-of-court ministry where we're going to have a podcast, and so kind of like this. I just go sit down with somebody from the congregation, and we say, hey, I asked them, hey, what brings you to the church? Like I tell people on Discord, what brings you to the Discord? So sometimes we come together and we discuss that, and I noticed that very quickly turned into not discussing the podcast, but discussing what Job thinks about religion nowadays. So basically what I brought up with him was, I don't have so much a problem with the resurrection anymore. That seems to have happened. At least something has happened. It seems obvious.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't really have an issue with God anymore. I mean, that just kind of, that buck stops at consciousness anyway, and beyond that point, I can't do much with it anymore. There seems to be something going on. So okay, seems there's a God. Seems there was a resurrection. I don't consider myself a believer. I don't seem to be able to. My pastor said, just be patient. You're trying too hard. But okay, fine. What I kind of have a problem with is the way that Jesus had to die. So I ask myself, why the crucifixion? Like, could it have been anything else? Would it have worked if it had not been a crucifixion? Would it have worked if it had been decapitation? And I'm not saying that to be flippant.
No, I know, yeah. So where to dip in? I don't really think of myself as a determinist, and I'm not sure. There's a philosopher, I believe he's a German philosopher, I'm not sure when, but I think his name is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. I think. Who's tapping in here? Who's that?
Jeff.
Oh, that's maybe just Jeff listening.
It's just me. I'm not really here. Ignore me.
Okay. You're just an olive cube rectangle.
It's the spirit of Jeff.
Yeah. But anyhow, Leibniz said something like, I believe, maybe I'm misremembering, but I believe he's the one who's most, or he's known for the idea of the best of all possible worlds. Job, it's a Job sandwich, Jeff sandwich with Job in the middle.
Look, we're talking very.
So right, back to the crucifixion with But so he said the best of all possible worlds, and so people, because a lot of times people will come up with the idea of, this world seems broken, or like, if I were God, I could create a better world, or there's a lot of brokenness here, or this doesn't work, so I can imagine that this would be better, or this would be that, or this. And his basic idea was God is perfect and everything he does is perfect, and so the fact that this world is the world that exists, this is the best of all possible worlds. It's essentially to me, it's essentially the idea of so a book that I really love that I was mentioning on the Discord this morning is this book, Notes from the Tilt-a-Whirl, and my favorite quote from it that I bring back all the time is, probabilities are the prophets of a mechanical God. And what I take that to be is that a lot of times, this is what I would just say broadly, is like the what if question. And this is just honest, this is just for me. I'm not promoting anything like, as an absolute thing. But whenever I hear what if questions, I'm just like, they don't even make sense to me. Because what is what is. And so like even your question of how Jesus died and the crucifixion and the cross and the brutality of it, and could have it been done this way? My short answer to that would be no, because it didn't. But it's not as if, it's almost as if asking that question is coming from a, and I'm not saying this to you, but to me it seems like it's coming from an overly analytical, formulaic, systematic, mechanical framework. And that's just not the way that I think reality is. You know, like, could have it happened this way? The question doesn't even make sense to me. No.
Well, I wonder if Jesus knew, because, I mean, he never alludes to the idea that he will get nailed to a cross. He will talk in metaphor, saying they will destroy this temple and in 3 days I will rise it up. But
right.
like, I mean, I think Paul got decapitated. So did John the Baptist.
Yeah. It's like,
I mean, I can imagine people hanging like little axes around their neck. That would just be kind of weird, I guess.
Yeah, and people, I could hear, there's other voices in my head that say people could respond that like the prophetic, all the prophecies pertaining to the Messiah and to Jesus and the suffering Savior and things that come out in the New Testament, that like, cursed is anyone who is hung on a tree, and people would allude back to kind of the images of Moses wandering in the desert and the snakes come and bite everyone, and so he makes the staff with a snake on it, that if anyone raises up their eyes and looks to the staff or the cross with a snake on it, you know, then they'll be healed, essentially. You know, that story from the Exodus. And so there's all of these biblical allegories and symbols and things that are connected to a tree. And I think, like, in a very Jonathan Pageau way, he would talk about, I think all these things are symbolically connected, like tree in the garden and death and cross, tree, and cursed is he that is hung on a tree, and the Son of Man will be lifted up. Like, all of that stuff is symbolically connected. But those are still within the whole framework of analyzing it to say, like, could it have been otherwise? I just think, even though I would affirm all that symbolism, I just think it was necessary in the sense that, like, that's what happened. I don't know what you think about that, or if that answers your question at all.
Well, it's the first time I hear that approach of the don't try to analyze it because that's what happened.
It's not that there's anything wrong with analyzing it. It's just that this gets into my whole critique of the spirit of, I can't even remember what it is, but like the spirit of geometry, yeah, versus the spirit of finesse, and the analytical mind, and the mind that's kind of always trying to figure out to have dominion. I mean, you can come at that from two different spirits. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not accusing you of trying to figure it out to have dominion, but it's almost like the analytical mind is, I don't know, is innately wired to fit everything into a structure and a system, rather than seeing somewhat an inarticulable and an ineffable harmony, you know. This is why I like the Orthodox tradition of like the apophatic stuff more so than like more didactic Western analytical approaches, you know.
Okay, I think this hooks into something else.
Okay.
So, Luke, let's say you wake up tomorrow and everything's just the way it is. You just wake up like you...
I'm saying, let's hope.
Oh, okay. Let's say you do, hypothetically. What's existence to... I can't formulate this easier. What is your frame for existence? Damn it. How do I phrase this without it sounding too vague? Okay, so let me try to connect it to what I'm trying to get at. Story time. I go to the butcher, and as usual, I've been thinking about religion because I can't help myself. And I'm just ordering my usual things, and there's the butcher behind the counter, and I'm kind of just waiting for him to wrap my stuff up. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, if this is all true, then this guy behind the counter is a child of God, just like I would be a child of God. And, you know, he looks at me, he hands me the stuff, and I can almost see it. Because, and the closest I can describe it is a purposeful creation of everything. That's a very strange idea, an idea I can only hold on to for a couple of seconds before I have to let it go because it is too large.
That sounds the same to me as the best of all possible worlds, a purposeful creation. What is.
I'm trying to find a way to contain that without having to let it go after a couple of seconds.
Yeah,
so
I think that is a beautiful what you're trying to do, I think is fantastic. And I think more people ought to be doing that. But so this gets into, I think you will be able to stay in that space more through practices of meditation and silence and contemplation versus active thought.
But okay, so the reason I started with asking you, let's say you wake up in the morning, is that your worldview? Like, is that how you wake up?
Living in the place where you are, maybe not consciously, but like actively aware of infinite purpose. Could you say it that way?
Oh, see, the problem with
and intent and beauty and harmony. So I wouldn't say that I live there all the time, but this is where I think I struggle sometimes relating to people who are more naturally dualistic and compartmentalizing in their brain. I don't really live in that space. So even when people say, and this isn't I think I can grow in certain areas with that, but like when people talk about prayer or like praying all the time, I do think that I am more naturally inclined to just live in that place all the time. I mean, I feel like I am communing with, and not always, but like my natural, to answer your question, when I wake up, it feels relatively natural to me to feel like you're communing with God all the time. And there's a spectrum that's where you're seeing purpose and beauty and intent and wonder and awe. And it's like you're, for lack of a better term, it's like you're seeing the panorama of everything. It's kind of like what a lot of the beautiful poet, and I don't know who, I've heard a lot of people have said something like this, and I can't remember specifically the person who said this or the exact quote that's coming into my mind, but like a lot of great thinkers and mystics have said things like the whole universe is contained in like the petal of a flower.
The snoring of a sleeping cat. That's what I was told.
I don't know.
I was told that
one?
The entirety of creation unfolds in the snoring of a sleeping cat.
Sure. Yeah, that's the same thing. It's like seeing the universal in the particular. And essentially what I would call that is those are iconic eyes. That's seeing everything as iconic, because you're seeing the thing, but you're also seeing the thing that transcends the thing. And it's the universal in the particular. And so that's essentially having God-oriented vision. It's seeing God everywhere. To answer your question, huh?
Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, like, I don't live there all the time, because I think to live there all the time is to approach sainthood. This is what I would tell you, is I think someone who lives there, I think biblical examples of people who essentially did that, and this is kind of the orthodox idea of theosis, I think, purifying your vision to such a degree that you see that everything is God, that you see God in everything. I would say biblical example would be like Enoch or Elijah, the kinds of people who didn't even taste death because they didn't have to. I don't know that I fully worked out my thinking as to be able to break it apart again analytically, what happened with Enoch and Elijah. Like Enoch walked with God and he was no more, for God took him. Like, what does that mean? I don't know fully, but I think my intuition says is the kind of awareness and presence that sees the universal in the particular is synonymous with walking with God. And I think if you were capable of living that way, you would transcend missing the mark, because you would merge with God.
Basically, it's about that frame that Paul talks about. Because it's when you look at somebody, you don't put a frame around them, but you work from your larger frame. The risk that this has is that it turns into some sort of new agey pantheism thing.
Well, this is what I always tell Paul, and he's never commented on him, but every time he brings up pantheism, I quote in the comments panentheism.
I knew you were going to bring that up as a retort.
So, because this is the whole rub between spirit and matter and duality and this whole tension that you have. At some place, you have to resolve it all in oneness. And ultimately, that's Trinitarian. At some point, you have to get the universal and the particular in harmony. You have to. There is, in the end, the kind of faux dualisms that we like to talk about all the time will be shown to be the same thing as time. They're not real.
Maybe this is the same thing that Peterson talks about, where he says you can try to be in line with that which you could be for maybe a second, and maybe then for 5 seconds. And we don't know what the limit to that is.
Right. But no, I think that's exactly right. This is walking on water to me, to bring up our point from the last thing. I'm serious. Like when Peter walked on water, so that whole story, right? Jesus, they're out on the sea. They're scared, the big storms. All of a sudden they see someone walk on water. They think it's a ghost. They realize it's Jesus. Jesus is like, Peter, come out and walk, come to me. When Peter steps out of the boat and he's walking on the water, he has merged. He is merging. He's done that divine dance thing. He's lost himself in a flow state fully absorbed in Jesus, and he's fully living in faith in the kind of thing you're describing, where he's seeing the universal in the particular, and it's in the face of Jesus Christ, to quote Paul in 2 Corinthians. He's beholding the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. He's seeing Jesus for what he is, as the exact icon of God the Father. And when he's doing that, he's walking on water. And then he sees the storm and the waves, and he defaults back to the spirit of geometry, and he gets scared, and he starts analyzing and sees the storm, and he starts sinking. That's what theosis is to me. That is like a snapshot glimmer into final participation, for lack of a better term, into a glimpse of the telos of what man is meant to be. I love that story.
Wow, yeah.
But it's hard to live there all the time, and this is why I think that it particularly, so maybe I could bring it up this way negatively. This is why I've been obsessed with the Joker recently, the movie. Just absolutely obsessed. And I think it's because the Joker is, and I couldn't agree more with Burn Power's video, it's a warning for our time, and it's a how do I bring this in? It's like it's a negative example of the potential opposite of what I'm describing with Peter walking on water, which is a loss of connection, extreme isolation, God leaving you to yourself. God, what is that quote? Like, hell is essentially, man, there's a really good quote about that that's been thrown around the Discord recently. I can't remember what it is though. And so, like, the Joker to me is the opposite of that. It's a lack of connection. It's a lack of union. It's seeing purpose nowhere. That's what nihilism is. And this is what I think why I love the Joker so much is I see it as a symbolic representation of the very thing, the whole Jordan Peterson, Paul Vanderklay phenomenon is working to be a remedy or an antidote to. But it's just the other side of the coin.
I haven't followed anything around that movie, so
yeah, it's good. I mean, like, I don't know if you get I don't watch the Burn Pile. If you do watch it, and I don't know how interesting. It's dark. It's very dark. Like, there's nothing happy about it. But it's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful movies I've seen in a long time. I have to go all the way back to Tree of Life to find another movie that I think is as good a quality of art as that movie. But it's a warning. I mean, it's bad art. Like, there's nothing happy about it. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, maybe that doesn't relate to what you were saying.
Maybe not, but I should probably go see it. Yeah, I liked what you said about the walking on water, and that, man, I'm such a materialist. This stuff is so hard to come to terms with. What I want to be sure of, that as I explore all this stuff, is even if let's say I meditate on it or I journal on it or whatever works, it must be something that I must not tell myself in order to. It mustn't be a lie I tell myself. Like, yeah. Because then it's just another act as if the world is purposeful. What I'd like to is to hold the view that the world is purposeful, because as I said in my conversation with Rob Thornstar recently, I've come to realize that I'd rather live in a world where the resurrection happened than in a world where it didn't. Yeah. Which is new to me, but okay, clearly I've had a change of mind in that regard. Not that I ever really felt that I didn't want to, but well, I guess I did. It is kind of interesting because I used to be really concerned about the whole idea of living in a potentially purposeful world, because it's the whole existential part of, well, then everything matters. Like everything, every little thing absolutely matters to the...
You have that same fearful sobriety that Jordan Peterson has.
I think it's just me having listened to Jordan Peterson and agreeing with him.
Right. Yeah, sure.
I don't think they're my own ideas, but like that's the whole Kierkegaardian with your nose full on existence, because that's the only proper way to be once you realize what existence entails in all its terror and all its glory.
Right.
And you'd almost kind of want to try and go back to your nihilistic atheism, because, well, we can kind of just freewheel and die. And that doesn't seem enough anymore once you've kind of seen this side. Like, if you're existing, you might as well really exist.
Yeah, for sure. But I think to maybe balance out those fears is maybe the hope or the belief that God is also better than you can imagine. And so even though there is all that degree of seriousness and responsibility and that everything matters, that isn't necessarily a scary thing. I think when you think of it this way, when you think that God is a God of abundance versus a God of lack, he's not the kind of God. I mean, Jesus said this himself. He's not the kind of God who, if his son is hungry, gives him a rock. And so if you knock, if you search, you will find. And really the only thing to be lost, and even the fear of that weight of glory and that weight of responsibility, that's just the residual dead wood fearing its own destruction. So I think within Christianity and within hope and union with Christ, there is such a thing that's, I mean, it's the recovery of a childlike wonder and hope and trust. Little kids, like, I think about this a lot. So I would contrast it with just, it's not a childishness, it's a childlikeness. So it's not like you're naive. And this is where I love, one of my favorite biblical phrases is wise as serpent, but innocent as a dove. That's the harmony of, like, that's almost like, you could almost take that phrase in a very Jungian way. That's a, like, slaying the dragon and making it your bitch, for lack of a better term. And so you're wise as a serpent. You've integrated your shadow, but you're using that now as a lackey for your recovered childhood innocence and awe and wonder. Because I think about that all the time, like really little kids, like when my kids were really little kids, and little kids go to the park and they see some other kid, because we live in Minneapolis. Minneapolis has like I grew up in a really rural place, away from any sort of diversity, but now we live in Minneapolis as this huge Somali and Ethiopian population stuff. So there's a lot of Muslim people around, and like my kids, when they're really little, or when they see, like, they'll go up to some other little girl with who's wearing like a hijab or something, and they're just within like 2 minutes they're holding hands and playing at the park. Adults don't do that, because we're hardened and jaded and calloused, and fear has taken over. So we have this, we're living in our analytical mind and our dualisms. And so like that love has been suppressed. But I think somehow within Christianity, there's a way to be, there's a way to hold that weight of glory and that tension of that responsibility, that everything matters. I feel like there's some phrase that I'm just missing that's on the tip of my tongue, like this incredible holiness, kind of like the Isaiah image of holy, 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 the Lord God Almighty, the whole earth is full of his glory, and touching his tongue with the hot coal. Like it's intense, but yet it's intense in a way that is, it's intense in the way, and it's beautiful in the way that's like a 4-year-old kid holding hands with the other at the park. And that maybe seems like those are opposite things or different things, but I don't think they are.
No, but that's I think that's exactly right, because the kid acts out of the love first, like just the kind of a love for the world and truth. And truth is, I want to play. That kid wants to play. Let's go, just play together. There's nothing else there. Yeah,
there is it, and that's why love is at the top of the Christian hierarchy.
Now, when one kid pushes the other kid off the swing set, it's not like they're not aware that these things exist, but they won't use them as a shield.
Right, and they get. It's amazing how fast a small child, often will just forgive, move past it. They have grace. They're best friends again within a matter of seconds, because they have that built-in robustness that somehow just over time, the devil, the world, and the self, just the ego, just bash you down, so you lose that kind of youthful innocence. A lot of how I see my own faith is an attempt to recover, that inner child that we're repressing all the time with our defense mechanisms and our walls and our fears and our insecurities.
But that's also a part of that self, because the self develops pretty late.
Yeah.
So those who if you lose yourself, you will regain it, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's where the Jesus, the Rene Girard, and trampling down death by death and overcoming violence and enemy love and all of that stuff, that's where the childlike oneness and holding hands at the park becomes, that's the adult version of childlikeness. That's the innocent as serpent, but wise as doves. Or wise as serpents, innocent as doves. That's the conscious knowing it's not this youthful naivete. It's an aware, because like even now I just remember this, like my oldest son is like on the verge of, and I don't know, he still has this very like beautiful youthful puppiness to him. Like he hasn't become like kind of a jaded teenager. He's 12, and he's just, and I love it. I'm somewhat, I'm not prone to anxiety, so I'm not consciously all fearful of him losing it, but I really don't want him to. And the reason he pops into my head is I'm trying to illustrate this kind of youthful naivete of versus like an adult submission to what enemy love looks at like, it's not just like holding hands with some other kid who hasn't done anything to you. It's someone who's pushed you off the swing repeatedly and then murdered your family, but so they know I've been obsessed with this Joker movie. They're familiar with Batman and the whole Batman series and stuff, and so they get so interested. They just want to know everything, and so I just start explaining a little bit of the story to them, which is pretty dark. And I'm doing it, somewhat selectively. I'm not just like recounting the whole thing, but just like as they're hearing stories about how this character, Arthur Fleck, who becomes the Joker, has just been abused and maligned and had no one love him and friends and betrayed, all these different things, because I really see that story as kind of like, it's amazing to me that he didn't crack well before he did. And as I'm just outlining this stuff, I'm just thinking, I'm getting lost in the story, and I'm just telling him stuff. And all of a sudden, like, my son, Malachi, who still has this just like innocence and softness in him, he just like starts weeping because he's so sad for like just how this man's story.
Wow.
Just through this story. And that's kind of like, that's what I still love in my son. I mean, he's just, he's an emotional feeler, which is great. But then he's like, there's a way that as a youth and as a child, you can be quickly forgiving like that because you've never really tasted real pain, real trauma, real brokenness, And I think like me just talking about the Joker a little bit was just giving a glimmer of that. But like that's kind of like that transcendent presence that I'm talking about with like Enoch or Elijah or walking on water is like that's the mature version. That's what Jesus did, is like when you're betrayed by everyone, when everyone leaves you, when you're fighting the powers and the principalities and the systems, and it's Christ versus the crowd, and you still love. And Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. I mean, that's the grown-up version of childlikeness. Like that's why he's the archetype. That's why he's the savior. And so that's my belief. When you merge with that, you walk on water and you move mountains, literally.
You just brought up a thing this has been ages ago. Like this must have been like 15 years ago, at least. We were at a family gathering, and my aunt had become a mother, and she had her like infant, like can be more than couple months old at that time with her, and I don't know how old I was. So I don't tend to get emotional. I just don't. But she shows me this baby, and I just start to cry. I couldn't even talk because it was simply the absolute fragility of that life that now had to exist in this world. And I don't think I understood it at that level back then. But thinking about like, what would I have done to protect that child, which wasn't my own, to protect it from harm.
Yeah.
And that feeling was so strong. I'd never experienced something like that.
So what I want to bring up though, and this gets to like what Jeff and I and you were talking about, like, and you as an icon, when you saw that child and you were weeping, this is why I would like to push you beyond mere propositional knowing, because you say you want to be conscious of this stuff in your belief. But the same Job that now can articulate maybe what you were seeing in that child, you knew it then, which is why you were crying. You just couldn't articulate it.
I didn't understand it. I remember that.
You didn't understand it in an articulatable way.
Right.
But you did understand it because you acted as if. You saw it and you wept. And this is I don't know. I feel like that's an illustration, and I think it's really important that's a piece that people miss, is that we just feelings and intuitions, and when they are true, when they're aligned with the truth and the right and the good, they're true. Like there's nothing wrong with articulating this stuff. But it's I don't know. That's why I love little children, to your point.
Yeah, like you're talking about your son, and he just starts to weep because of the tragedy.
That's what I'm afraid of in him. Is I'm afraid, and that's maybe where I don't have faith, and where I start to fall into my own analytical mind, that I'm afraid that his exposure to tragedy will break his childlikeness And I see it in him, and it's one of my favorite things about having children is they're not jaded and broken by the world like so many adults are, you know? And I'm constantly trying to live in that place as an adult. And so, you know, I don't know. God have mercy.
Yeah. Mercy indeed. But even, like, let's say they don't become jaded. No, it's probably nothing. I'm just wondering how that would influence them acting in the same world. Because you can become very jaded about the world and still feeling like you should act, especially because you're jaded. Yeah, it's probably not going anywhere.
Well, I mean, and my kids, for example, are always in that tension. Like when they have, so like their greatest potential to be jaded are probably in like our interfamilial bitterness and difficulties that we have all the time, you know, like in their bickering between each other, like, you know, sister number one does this all the time and she's doing this all the time. And I mean, and I see that, like, this is why I do believe like these things are all, and this is how I speak to my kids, like these are all cosmic battles of infinite importance all the time. Like in this moment of disagreement with your sister who's doing this, because I see them doing that all the time. And it's no different than an adult. It's just a really stripped down, honest, bare representation of what adults overcomplicate is like, they did this and it's not fair. And I mean, it's fighting for your own, all of those interactions are an opportunity to exercise grace and mercy and forgiveness and truth and to act like Christ. And we never want to. I mean, we just always want to excuse ourselves. Because it's hard. That's where it's infinitely hard.
Well, we want to be God because we want the world to be a certain way, but we refuse to be Christ in order to become it.
Well said. Yeah, we want to be, and even in that way that you established it, is like we want to be God, but we want to be God in the image of our God, where all the injustices that we don't like, the injustices against us are corrected, but not the injustices that we're throwing out.
Yes.
And this is like when Paul talked about the other day, if we had a you know, in some big brother future state of surveillance, like your smartphone that just records every judgment that you utter against someone else. And if there was just a tabulation of those, and then at the final judgment, if the only measure you were judged was your own judgments against other people, who would stand? And this is the very thing that Jesus said, like, be careful you who judge, for in your judgments you condemn yourself, and by the measure you use, it will be measured against you. I mean, Jesus said that very same thing. And that's where we have to, I think, that reality, I think, can help us to live outside of our own hypocrisy and actually forgive, is because, and that's why I tell my kids too all the time, they'll be like, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. But they only ever want to conjure the principality of fair when it benefits them. You know, when it's unfair to their advantage, they're not saying it's not fair. They never bring it up. They're just like, oh, that's great. You know? And that's how we all are.
Christianity is such a crazy story to live in.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I got nothing else, man.
Well, that's good. I mean, we probably did a substantial enough time if we're going to actually post it.
Well, I'll stop recording for now. We're at about 55 minutes. Thanks for your time, Luke. Much enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, for sure. Ditto.